space is a place for us.
Real people with real issues.
Discussing real topics.
Black space.
A safe space for our community.
What category would you choose for us to unite as a people? Some people would say African American. Some would say, my father was a black nationalist, Republican of Africa. You have Garveyites who, black man rise up. First of all, I do believe that there's nothing wrong with us being proud of our melanated skin and the beauty that comes with that. Now, is that the limitation of who we are? Of course not. Because what happens is if you try to totally take away black or totally take away any of our ancestral connection, then that just makes us totally assimilated people with no connection to any type of cultural history or ancestry at all. So we have to be very careful with that. So I'm not sure. I'm not gonna make an assumption of what you conclude as our what you would use for our unification as a people, because it has to be something we hold on to. There has to be something to hold on to. Black was something. But one time we were Negro, we were colored, we were nigger, all that. So we progressed to certain. Now they say we're African American. So what's the next level? Now, when it comes to the sister said before about the black man in the church, I think what she said has some truth to it. I'm not a Christian at all, but I think if you look at the reasons as to why the black man is not in the church, you have to go back to when the black man was into the church. And one of the most powerful movements ever by our people historically was the Garvey movement, which was actually a quote unquote Christian-centered movement. However, most of the focus was not on the religion. Most of the time when they had church, quote unquote, it was about talking about economics. So what was the result of that? The result of that was it was the largest movement ever known to the history of people of African descent in this country ever. Because Marcus Garvey decided that we are going to have our own levels of distribution, manufacturing, everything. Everything was ours. And the interesting part was he actually was successful at motivating and joining together the most impoverished groups of us, the most disenfranchised of us. And he did not do it from the standpoint of just come listen to me and maybe one day you'll die and go to heaven. That wasn't that. Which I hate. The reality is, go back to the main reality is, most pastors today and most churches today are not relevant to the black man. So until we acknowledge that fact, so as a teacher, if my students are not motivated to learn in my class, I have to look at what am I doing wrong as far as structurally, and as far as what am I doing wrong as far as my lesson. So the church today is not relevant to the black man. That's why you see.
I want to pause you there.
Let me finish this statement. And I'm not saying it from an emotional standpoint. We can look at statistics. Like the sister said. So let me finish what I'm saying. And I'm not an emotional speaker. I speak strictly on data. If you look at the data, black women greatly outnumber us in the church, but it wasn't always like that. So my issue is if you want to improve or increase the level of relevance of both, not just men, but young people are also leaving in droves as well from churches. You have to make it relevant to both of those populations. And first of all, the church is a quote unquote come to Jesus moment to acknowledge. First of all, last statement. It needs to acknowledge that there is not relevant as it should be. If it's not humble enough to acknowledge it itself and its flaws, like any person, like a person. If you can't acknowledge your flaws, you will not grow. You will not progress. You will die. So
a couple of points.
Kenny, before you do that, he asked a really important question that I just want to put out there. At the very first part, he said, if not black, then what do we find to unify on? And I just want to put that in there for everybody's submission is that first, before we can even agree what to unify on, that we have to at least come to a decision as to whether is the label black unifying enough? Is that really working for us right now? Because if we still believe that black is working for us, then it will never be able to move to the next step in our evolution of unification.
And that's a couple points I want to hit on. The first point is a point that you've made several times, George, is that when you lead with black, that in and of itself becomes a division. The church, the capital C church,
Well, I
Christian.
can't hear you. Hey, somebody else, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Someone's coming in to interrupting you. What you were saying. Go ahead, though.
The capital C church Christian has always been a moral leader. I think a lot of people's issue with the Christian church that circles around economics.
Yes.
But the capital C church has led on morality. They pleaded with the United States government during the civil rights movement on it for moral reasons. It wasn't
Which
just
church?
It was the black church. They led.
See, I'm going to have to just interrupt if I want to talk. I want to support what you're saying, Penny, and offer perspective that has not yet come up. I watch a lot of behavioral scientists on YouTube, listen to them while I work. I read books by behavioral scientists because that's just my jam. And so it's interesting how white people reverse engineer what black people and spiritual people, especially spiritual melanated people, have always known, because white folks just have to do things the way white folks have to do things. So even when they're religious, they'll reverse engineer stuff and come to the same conclusions. And now what I'm seeing trending in these presentations about wealth creation and personal development is that everything comes from you being becoming the highest version of yourself. The money, the influence. I'm talking about people, these white folks with money and influence that we're talking about. When they come together and talk and have their little conferences, what they conclude is, and what they pay thousands of dollars for other white people to tell them, is that all of the success comes from becoming the highest version of yourself, from confidence, from ethics, all the stuff that we've been talking about in church, especially black church, the entire time. The problem is these people take that very seriously and they do the work. We do not yet have a culture that honors hard work because of our unique circumstance. Anytime we worked hard, we were punished. There were punitive damage, there were consequences, often punitive. And our existence in this country was for the purpose of labor. And we were supposed to remain a permanent labor class, even after the institution of slavery was diminished. I mean, it's not eradicated. We still have the prison system.
Rebranded.
So, yeah, thank you, rebranded is the word. So, with that being said, we're at a deficit in our perspective on work and wanting to do the work. And then we have an absence of black males in the community with strong work ethic. So we go to church and hear the same things, but don't always know how to put it into action because our ethics are not practical. But that's more of a black people thing and not a black church thing because of our unique situation. Our ethics are not practical because we've never been in situations where we could get practical results directly like anyone else. Hard work plus unity equals positive results. We've been sabotaged at every step of the journey. So the idea that becoming the highest version of yourself is the beginning of all success, including financial and economic success, we've been saying that the whole time, but people aren't doing it. And I don't mean to bring gender into it or make it a gender thing, but I put this back on the black male leadership in the church because leadership really happens by example. If black male leadership was still there, and if the black male leadership that is there would do what they're preaching to us, I think we would all come up and the black church could again be the epicenter of economic growth. But we don't know what works economically across the board. Like black people don't know how to get the money in general. So how would the black church know? Like,
Ivo, you're making a really solid set of points. I just want to insert in there a label for what you're talking about. And I'm always coming from a therapeutic perspective. Those behaviors, that lack of accomplishment or lack of work ethic that you're referring to, that comes under the clinical label of learned helplessness. And that's a real psychological diagnosis. And learned helplessness can happen to any species, any living species. And as human beings, we are a species. We're not a race, we're a species. But we happen to be a species playing a race ideology game. And in the race ideology game, we always lose. And so when you work and you don't get that benefit for work and you give 150% and you only come up with 25% worth of effort, of outcome, over time, you just start resigning yourself to the fact that no matter how hard I work, it doesn't matter. And that becomes passed down generationally. And so you have a couple of generations of failure, of a try and fail, try and fail. The next generation, they just learn from that without you even officially or consciously teaching them. They just see that, hey, he didn't even try. Daddy don't even try anymore. And again, I say that those things that you're talking about, which are very true, are directly affected or directly connected to this label of Black. Because when you take on an identity of Black, you're taking on struggle. You're taking on a history of pain and trauma and torture. That's not an empowering perspective to fight from. Because when you say I'm Black, you're automatically engendering a white response. Whenever you make something Black, the white response is, well, because they don't lead by white, they don't lead by color, because they don't have to. Their system supports them. So, but because they're doing it unconsciously, when you lead by color, they want to respond to that, because that's what race ideology does. It makes you have to fight somebody. So when people start talking about diversity, racial harmony, racial unity, they're talking apples and oranges, because the two do not mix. Race was not intended for harmony. Race was not intended for people to be equal. Race is never intended for Blacks to be over whites. We didn't create that, the European created that. And what we keep trying to do is improve our situation under a white or European ideology. When we get rid of this subconscious beliefs associated with Black, we can then tune into who we really are and become the men and the women we're supposed to be. But right now, as long as we keep leading with color, we're going to get the same outcomes. And I would say that history is supporting my perspective.
Black Space, a safe space for our community.